Good afternoon. We're reviewing today the sermon from Sunday on Mark chapter 11, verses 27 through 33. We finished up Mark 11. We're heading on to Mark 12 later this week. But first, just a quick review on what we covered on Sunday. The title of the sermon was Perfection Examined. And the central origins of this passage revolve around this notion of the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes coming to Jesus and asking for him to prove the authority by which he's been acting the way he's been acting in the temple. And one of the things I mentioned at the start of the sermon on Sunday was just imagine being Jesus and being asked that question or being asked for that demand. Imagine being someone who for the past number of years has taught with authority, who has cast demons out of people, who subsequently has empowered his disciples to cast demons out of people in his name, who has healed people of ailments, who has performed significant miracles, both in the natural world and just in general, who brought a child back to life, and who has been transfigured and spoken with Moses and Elijah to wield that kind of authority, to be him, and to be asked by these individuals by what authority he acts. It is really something. And so one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the sermon was that this request from this group of people known as the Sanhedrins betrays their ignorance and their arrogance. So on one hand, it's to not heed all the other things and reports that have come out about Jesus. It's to not pay any attention to what he's already said, what he's already done, and what he's already accomplished. And on the other hand, it's also to showcase that even if you knew these things, you still think so highly of your station and your status and your aspirations as to be arrogant enough to ask this of Jesus. And it's important to put it that way because what you realize is that this request of theirs is accusatory. It's not an inquiry. It's not harmless. It's not benign. This is with malicious intent. The object of this is to entrap Jesus and ultimately to destroy him. And so it's important to start there. We cited Psalm 140, verse 5. The idea in the sermon was imagine Jesus even perhaps thinking of this verse as they approached him. The arrogant have hidden a trap for me. With cords they have spread a net. Beside the way they have set snares for me. And so you get the idea that they've come here to entrap Jesus. They've come here to ensnare him. And what's fascinating about this is that Jesus has a question for them. And his question is, by what authority did John the Baptist carry out his ministry? Was it from heaven or was it from earth? And twice Jesus calls on them to answer him. So this is a very powerful rabbinical method that Jesus is doing, where you receive a question and counter with a question. And notice that Jesus appealed to precedent. He asks where John the Baptist's authority comes from, and that's brilliant because Jesus's own ministry is tied to John the Baptist's. And so in an indirect way, Jesus is able to argue for his own authority by way of John the Baptist as proxy. And this is brilliant because Jesus's ministry is from God and it is messianic. And as a result, it's connected to John the Baptist, who was the forerunner to the Messiah. And so what you start to realize is one of the reasons why the Sanhedrin don't want to answer this question from Jesus is because they did not have a cheery and good relationship with John the Baptist. If you recall, John the Baptist referred to them as a brood of vipers who did not bear fruit with repentance. And so they're not really keen to mention that John the Baptist's ministry comes from heaven. On the other hand, this was a public event. They approach Jesus in public. Jesus counters them in public. And his question is in the midst of others. And we're told that they fear the crowds. They fear the opinion of those around him. And as a result, they don't want to answer because they know that if they say John the Baptist's ministry came from human authority, then the people are going to be upset because they viewed John the Baptist as a prophet. And so what we ended up getting at, and this is one of the three major points that I want to focus on from the sermon. The first point I really want to focus on from Sunday is that rebellion from God leads to fear of man. And so it's important that we recognize that when the Sanhedrin say that we don't know, well, of course they knew. They absolutely knew. The issue is not that they don't have knowledge. The issue is that they have rebelled. And that's still to this day the problem that we face today. The reason why people won't acknowledge the authority of Christ is because they want to rebel. They would rather rebel from Christ than heed Christ. And so we have to make we have to reconcile the reality that when we're asking for authority claims from Jesus, when we're asking for him to prove his authority, what we're really doing is giving ourselves credence to rebel. And the problem with that is what comes out of that, what that inevitably leads to is fear of man. When you refuse to fear God and when you rebel from God, you ultimately are going to get to the place where you fear man. And that's really important to recognize, because too often we think that when we rebel from God, now we have no slave driver. We have no authority over us, that we're finally free. That's what a lot of people reason. The problem with that is that's the opposite of what life tells us, right? And in this moment, the Sanhedrin fear the people, and so they don't fear God anymore. And as a result, they now fear the crowds, and they won't answer. And so that makes me think of a couple of Proverbs. One of them, Proverbs 29, verse 25, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. And so you get this idea that if your fear is in God, then you won't rebel and you'll have nothing to fear but God. But then the other proverb to really pay attention to is to understand where this rebellion comes from. Proverbs 26:27, whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and a stone will come back on him who starts its rolling. So you get this idea that your rebellion, you think that in your rebellion, you're liberating yourself, but in reality, that rebellion leads to the ensnarement you think you're liberating yourself from. The other 2 points that I want to make is that when the Sanhedrin won't be good faith brokers with Jesus, he shuts down the engagement. He refuses to continue to engage with the Sanhedrin. And that gets me to the second to last point I really want to focus on today, which is this: true authority knows with whom to invest time and to whom to dispense wisdom. And so Jesus knows not to invest his time, limited time he has left, in these arguments with the Sanhedrin. And he also knows to whom to dispense wisdom, which is why next week, when we get into Mark chapter 12, Jesus will immediately begin speaking in parable form again, because he is going to veil these truths from these individuals he refuses to engage with anymore. And so that's smart of us to recognize too. The way I mentioned this on Sunday is that you can tell unhealthy churches from the notion that their leaders and their shepherds are investing their energy in the wrong people. So they are engaging with the wrong people and they're dispensing their wisdom and their time in the wrong places. And that's how church unhealth is even created in the first place. The second thing I want us to recognize, and this is very important, or I'm sorry, this is the final thing I wanted to recognize, final point from the sermon that I really want us to focus on, is it's not just that true authority knows to whom and how much to share wisdom with people. True submission, this is the other side of the coin. True submission knows to whom to give your time to and from whom to collect wisdom. So think of it from the opposite direction. To truly submit is to know who to give your time to and your attention to and who to collect wisdom from. And that's where you can really start to understand where church deconstruction comes from. When you hear about a deconstruction story, that is a story of rebellion. That is a story of someone who does not want to heed the authority of Christ. And so in that failure to submit, rebellion emerges, and you see the cycle play out. They're going to fall into a fear of man. All poor doctrine, all scenarios where people get into trouble in terms of theology comes from where you place your fear. And if you have orthodoxy, if you are in a strong doctrinal place, it's from a fear of God. And if you're in a place where your doctrine has waned and you're getting into the weeds, that's coming from a fear of man. All poor doctrine comes from fearing the wrong thing. And so again, deconstruction is a result of false submission. It's an example of one who will rebel because they do not wish to recognize the authority of Christ and to submit to it. And so what that means for us is this: as we start to conclude where we went on the sermon on Sunday, we need to recognize the authority of Christ. We need to recognize his authority. We need to submit to him, and we need to glean his wisdom. And if we do that, we're going to examine his perfection. And that's where we ended, is that if the issue was about authority, what the Sanhedrin didn't understand was that Jesus's authority was going to be best displayed on the cross of Christ. When Jesus was crucified on the cross, that is where his authority was best put on display. How? Because ironically enough, it's us who's done wrong. Christ didn't do anything wrong. We did. And so in going to the cross, this is where Jesus doesn't crack under scrutiny. This is where Jesus presents himself as the pure and spotless and holy and perfect Lamb of God, the atonement for us. This is where Jesus's authority is on perfect display, because even under the most immense betrayal and immense scrutiny and examination, he is seen for what he is, which is perfect and blameless. And we all know we'd crack under so much less. And so it's at the cross that we see Christ's authority on display. And it's at the cross where we recognize how desperately we need to submit to him and surrender our lives to him. And so that's how Mark 11 ended, with a bang. Come back here in a couple days and we'll get ready to look at Mark chapter 12. God bless you.